Hello, this is the first part of a series of lessons that deal with the idea of citing sources and avoiding plagiarism. You'll see in this particular section an explanation of what is citing and an introduction to why we need to cite sources when we write a paper using other people's ideas and research. To begin with, the basic idea of citing is to give credit where credit is due. When you research a topic, you are naturally going to look around for good sources of information to use in your own paper. And the basic idea of citing is to give proper credit to those sources. And by proper credit, I mean correct citations and pointing your reader to the original source so that it's very clear what information is yours and what information comes from your sources. As a simple rationale, why do we cite sources? Most importantly, a well-researched paper with correct citation of sources makes you look better. It shows that you know your topic and that you know how to present it professionally and correctly. The research paper is a collaboration between you and the information that you find in your sources. And citing those sources correctly strengthens your own ideas in the process. This is the entire list. When it comes to what you need to cite in your paper, there are basically two things: direct quotations, which is probably pretty obvious, and any borrowed idea that you include within your own ideas of your research paper. Most folks have no problem with citing direct quotations, but the real problem comes in when you have to recall where the ideas in your paper came from, and that you must give credit to the original source of those ideas, even if you have reworded them entirely. It's also important to think about what you don't cite in a research paper. A research paper should never be simply a string of cited sentences or paraphrases or summaries. That's really not a research paper. That's just an accumulation of other people's ideas. So there are really two things that you don't need to cite in your own research paper. The first is general knowledge. There's a fairly simple example of that here on the screen in front of you. But you can probably take a moment to think of other examples of general knowledge, or what's sometimes called common knowledge. Things such as there are 50 states in the United States. Albert Einstein developed the theory of relativity. In 1492, Columbus landed in what is today considered the Americas. These sorts of general facts that you'll find in almost any source, from an encyclopedia, maybe even a dictionary, certainly a biography, there's no reason to cite these in your paper. Another important thing to think about it, the second thing that you don't need to cite in your paper, is your own original ideas. This may seem entirely obvious, but I mention it to remind you that this is your paper, and your research paper should centralize, should really show off your ideas. Every sentence in a research paper should not be cited. I'm going to conclude this presentation with this pop quiz. Would you cite the following? George Washington was the wealthiest president in U.S. history. Think about it for a moment. You may even want to pause this presentation, and in a moment I'll give you my answer. For my answer to this question, think about it for a moment. Would you cite this? First of all, is it common knowledge that George Washington was the wealthiest president in U.S. history? Most folks know him as the first president, but the fact that he was indeed the wealthiest president in U.S. history is probably not as well known. My short answer to this question is yes. I would cite this information because in all likelihood this information is open to interpretation, which means that it's probably somebody else's idea. In other words, was George Washington the wealthiest president compared to other people living at the time he did? Are you saying, or is your source saying, that George Washington was the wealthiest president in U.S. history compared to all other presidents, which is also true in relative terms? I think this is the kind of gray area where you're safer to cite the source of this information than to assume incorrectly that this is common knowledge. In the following presentations, in parts 2 and 3 and 4, we'll talk not only about what to cite and why to cite, but we'll start to get into how to cite your sources in a paper.